Alright, welcome to 99% Geek Presents another book reading of Suburban Fantasy. This will be the final episode of this book, which is Chapter 0 of 99% Geek Season... Well, it's 99% Geek Season 0, a Suburban Fantasy Season 1. So basically, I wrote this book before I started my brand of 99% Geek. And once this chapter is done, next it'll explode open because 99% Geek Season 1 contains not one, but 3 books being written at the same time. So you'll get new stories as well as a continuation of this story. So there is a whole nother story after this. If you thought it's over with the end of Eckhart, no, it's not. There's still more story to tell. It's going to be a story... Urban Fantasy Season 1 or Urban Fantasy Season 2, Urban Fantasy, which is the sequel to Urban Fantasy Season 1, A Suburban Fantasy, is about a mage from the ancient past who time travels to present day with all his magical powers intact in a world where no one else has magic. And yeah, it's going to be crazy. And that's just one of 3 stories. I'll tell you about the other 2 at the end of this chapter. But first, we've got a chapter to read. So here we go. Chapter 14. I promise I won't be long. Previously on A Suburban Fantasy, Rachel Lin Smith was a shy teenage girl until she was turned into a vampire against her will by an evil serial-killing monster named Eckhart Ghens. He terrorized her for a long time. She escaped him and returned to her geeky friends, where they helped her re-acclimate herself with her old life. But Eckhart Ghens found her, and they met in a church for a epic climax that was quite the battle that destroyed the church. But and she won. But something happened when she staked him through the heart, and lightning exploded everywhere, and things exploded, and there was glass, and she suddenly fainted, and that was how the chapter ended. So now, chapter 14, I promise I won't be long. This is a weird chapter, somewhat. I tried to break certain narrative rules. So I should warn you about a couple things, including that there are 2 narrators in this chapter, because basically Eckhart has taken over her mind, and so now she is the 3rd person narrator, or 2nd person, but then there's also a bolded narration throughout this chapter that is Eckhart Ghens' mind on top of her mind. So that's like we're getting 2 narrators in one, and they can hear each other's narration. It's really weird. But yeah, as I said, I tried to do something weird and different, and it really failed for a bit. When I published the book, it erased all the formatting originally. So for like a good year that my book was on Amazon, it didn't have any bolding for the Eckhart parts, which would have been really confusing for anybody who read it. But it's fixed now. So, well, we're about to find out, because we're going to read through it. So here we go. Chapter 14, I promise I won't be long. Shut up, phone. I'm busy. Alright. Rachel was unconscious. At least she thought she was. Everything was black, after all, which had to mean she was out cold, right? So why didn't she feel unconscious? You're not. Oh, that was terrible. You're not. Eckhart? Rachel said, surprised she could speak. She raised her hands to cover her mouth, only to realize she didn't have a mouth or hands. Oh, do relax. After all, you've already won. It was Eckhart's voice again, but she was hearing him inside her mind. What sort of new nightmare was this? And why was it every victory she won against Eckhart always ended up feeling much more like a loss? Because you're young, dumb, and emo. That's the word you young types use these days, right? Emo? I'm not emo, she corrected him. So it seemed he could read her thoughts. How incredibly unfair. Imagine how I feel.
Had I known you were such a brat on the inside, I wouldn't have turned you into a vampire and saved myself a lot of trouble.
Should I be flattered? She'd caused him trouble, after all.
I suppose you'd be within your right.
So what now? Rachel asked. Who's in control here, you or me?
When a human kills a vampire, it is an accomplishment. No easy feat, like a mouse killing a lion.
Like David killing Goliath?
But a vampire slaying another vampire is something else entirely. Complete domination, and a passing of life energies beyond even my comprehension. For a moment the two minds collide before the one is lost forever.
Now Rachel knew Eckhart was making this stuff up. Life energy?
Is it really so hard to believe?
It was. Then again, Rachel supposed Eckhart wasn't much of a scientist. So, how do I get out of here? Rachel asked, and leave you to your disappearing forever.
That's not up to you.
Of course not. It was up to him.
The horrors I've been subjected to at the mercy of my victims are beyond your understanding. You must understand that I am seeing clearly for perhaps the first time in 150 years. All I want now is to help you understand.
Ugh, Rachel said, already bored. Couldn't you just torture me? Lightning flashed in the deep black, and thunder rumbled so loudly that Rachel jumped, while her ethereal form jumped. Her body was still nowhere to be found. Lightning flashed again, and suddenly she was in a field, in the dead of night, beneath the torrential downpour of an incredibly windy storm. There was a tiny nearby cottage made of wood. It didn't look particularly inviting, nor was Rachel particularly confident it would survive the weather. A roar sounded in the distance. That was a terrible roar. It's supposed to be more animalistic than that. That just sounded like a dude making a roar, which it was. Anyway. But not so distant. A roar sounded in the distance, but not so distant for Rachel to feel safe. No, the creature was close and locked in battle. She could hear a young woman's fast breathing, wounded but determined to keep on her feet.
It was a dark and stormy night. The night I was born.
I'm surprised you remember, Rachel said, and Eckhart gave his annoying chuckle. Though this time silently within her head, it was even more annoying.
I may be taking a little creative license, but my papa often talked of this night to me. You see, I was my family's second child. The first was a daughter, and she was already beautiful and 13 when Mama became pregnant with me. My family had carved their home into the forest. Nature, it seemed, chose the perfect time to carve back. A pack of wolves attacked our farm the night of my birth, and Papa immediately knew why. They were after Mama and baby me. My sister didn't know the first thing about delivering a baby. There was no help for miles. Mama would need Papa by her side were she to live the night. That left my sister to fight off the hounds.
His sister, not just one, held a hand axe tightly in her grasp. Its slightly longer than normal handle dripped not with rain, but with blood. She'd already slain one of the wolves, but the one standing against her now was much bigger. It weighed perhaps more even than her. The creature bared teeth at her, glistening white and sharp as her axe. She swung once, her voice ringing out with an exasperated cry as her axe missed. Ah! And she stumbled forward. The wolf jumped straight at her face, but it couldn't reach her before she buried her axe deep into the animal's ribcage. Ignoring the blow, the wolf dug deep into her skull. With a shake of... Nope, no apostrophe. There. With a shake of its powerful jaws, the creature tossed her body around like a rag doll. Her neck broke with a brutal snap. Life was given that day, and life was taken away. The wolf continued a number of steps toward the door of Eckhart's cottage, but it didn't make it 5 feet before keeling onto its side. She did what she set out to do that night.
She saved us all. My father never let me forget it.
Suddenly it was daytime, and, without the storm, there was a pronounced quiet throughout the surrounding wilderness, more quiet than Rachel had ever known.
There are noises of the modern day that are always there and people just tune them out. But we both know better. We've heard those noises, Rachel. We're both vampires.
And one of us is a living vampire, Rachel reminded him. Eckhart was no more a vampire now than Jiminy Cricket.
Do try not to gloat.
A little boy came running out from the small cabin, excited to play through the day. Rachel knew immediately who the kid was, knew by the shudder making its way down her spine.
That boy is me. Though I would hardly say we are the same person. I do go through quite a transformation. The vampire you knew holds little ties to this boy here.
Then why are we here? Rachel asked, still unsure why her sire had suddenly become a whole different monster, the History Channel. And where is here?
Spain, just south of Sevilla.
Rachel had no idea where Sevilla was, but she had a more important question. When?
I was born in 1793. I don't know how old I am here, but maybe 3 or 4. I had a rough childhood, with my sister gone, and my mother often bedridden from a disease we couldn't understand. I was expected to take on a lot of responsibility at an early age.
Sure enough, the boy didn't go into the fields to play as Rachel had thought. Instead, he grabbed a large plow and proceeded to mix apart the dirt in preparation for the new season.
I never saw much of the outside world. Our farmland was far from anything resembling civilization. Only once or twice a year did my father make the trek out to town, following the Guadalquivir River to the city of Lebrija, and it wasn't until I was 14 years old that he allowed me to go with him.
Come on, Eckhart, his father yelled from a cart by the barn, laden with supplies for the city. He chained what seemed to be their only horse to the cart, and both men... You know what? I want to do his line again. My name is Sean Connery. Yeah, here we go. Come on, Eckhart. We're doing a Sean Connery accent. I mean, after all, he didn't play a Spanish person in Highlander when the Christopher Lambert, who I'm doing as Eckhart's voice, was playing a Scottishman. Very strange movie, but a very good movie. Anyway, back to what we were doing.
Come on, Eckhart.
His father yelled from a cart by the barn, laden with supplies for the city. He chained what seemed to be their only horse to the cart, and both man and animal seemed rearing to start off.
We need to get back before the first frost.
Turning back to the field, Rachel was surprised to see that Eckhart was older now. Time and his memories seemed to be fluid, and they were traversing it at a pace of his choosing.
It was 2 days' ride. Once we even made it in a day and 3/4.
Impressive, Rachel said sarcastically.
Impressive was the city of Lebrija. Maybe not by your definition, but at 14 it was the most impressive sight I had ever seen. At 14, I realized there was more than 3 people in the world.
The city was big, far larger than Rachel had been expecting. Church bells were heard ringing loudly from high towers, and Eckhart slowly rode his cart past the square white buildings lining both sides of the main cobble road. They passed the center of town and pulled up to a man waiting outside his shop. The man had a patchy gray beard and a modest outfit of tanned leather.
We've got a good yield for you this year.
Eckhart's father spoke up, and the other man chuckled. Ha ha ha.
The man was his business partner. My father grew the crops, and this man sold them in his shop. Gave Papa a good price, too. Help the man take the goods out of the cart,
Eckhart's dad ordered him, but the boy was far too distracted. His eyes kept focusing on the bustle around him, on the 2 girls fighting with sticks in the middle of the road, or the couple holding hands. All around his eyes darted, lingering especially on a whore beckoning patrons into her bordello.
First time into the city?
The shop owner asked Eckhart. The boy didn't need to answer. They began to unload everything from their cart, and once the man had a good idea how much stuff there was, he gave Eckhart's dad an estimate.
32 pence? 32 pieces of 8?
The shop owner said.
Pieces of 8?
Rachel asked out loud.
Peso, the Spanish currency.
Eckhart's papa frowned.
I hope that will be enough for all the supplies we need,
he worried out loud. The shop owner laughed, passing Eckhart to pat his dad on the back.
Anything we have that you need, he said, take it on the house. You're good for business. I can't have you dying off this winter.
I definitely lost the accent there. I apologize. Eckhart's father looked at the shop owner with suspicion.
You've never shown me any concern before,
he told the man.
Why now?
The shop owner suddenly became more than a little somber. They say Napoleon has marched... Oh, I didn't even try the accent there.
They say Napoleon has marched on Russia. Soon he might own all the world.
I got it back.
You don't really believe that,
Eckhart's dad commented.
Still, it's good to have friends.
The shopkeeper reached out and grabbed Mr. Ghens' hand.
Everything changes,
the man said.
That's the only constant in life.
His expression sober, he continued.
The Romans owned most of the known world and lasted 4,000 years.
Lost it again.
You know how that ends? There only is a constant in life,
Eckhart's father said, freeing his hand from the man's grasp.
Everyone dies.
Suddenly Rachel was back in the familiar field of Eckhart's home.
We survived that winter and many winters after that. Life continued very much as it always did, and unlike what the shopkeeper had said, change came slow if it came at all. That was until 1816. The entire world had a bad year in 1816, but I'll get to that in a moment. Before anyone had even gotten used to saying 1816, my father came down with something. He died by the end of the week.
Rachel was inside the cabin, and a young Eckhart was sitting diligently by his father's side as the winter winds whistled furiously from outside.
Listen to me, Eckhart,
he said, coughing into a handkerchief. What's he dying of? Rachel asked almost dutifully, though she cared little about the response. Syphilis? Wasn't that what everyone died from at that time? The sex disease? Both father and son turned to look at her, characters in Eckhart's imagination noticing her for the first time. All right, I'll shut up.
Don't be afraid, Papa,
Eckhart said to his father. I was like, should I do the Eckhart voice for this? Nah, let's do a little kitty voice. All right.
Don't be afraid, Papa,
Eckhart said to his father, the two of them going back to ignoring her like they'd never seen her at all.
Remember all the things you've told me about Gran. You'll be able to see her again, like it says in the Bible. You've never read the Bible,
his father told him, a smile creeping its way across his face.
Neither of you,
Eckhart said, smiling himself.
Being a farmer, my father didn't know how to read. Subsequently, neither did I. He'd been taught the Catholic religion, of course. Every Spanish child understood what it meant to break the rules and suffer Satan's wrath.
Me dijo que me escuchan, Eckhart's father said slowly. What? Rachel said, not quite sure what she just heard. I didn't get that. Escucha. Nada de eso es important. Like, try to do Sean Connery accent and speak Spanish is apparently very impossible. Let me try that again.
Escucha. Nada de eso es important,
he said, still speaking gibberish.
That's a show, El Hombre,
De la casa pronto y eso significa que va eterno que protege a su man. My Spanish sounds like French. I apologize, but I do not speak Spanish at all. Yeah, Rachel said. I think your translator thingy is on the fritz. She recognized that they were speaking Spanish, but that didn't mean she could understand a single word. She was Canadian, after all. Her second language was French. Even then, all she knew was bonjour, au revoir, and that was pretty much it.
My apologies. You have no idea how hard it is to translate all this for you. The concentration needed is enormous.
I certainly hope you're not going through all that trouble just to waste my time, Rachel said, complaining.
Maybe I am.
You have to get your head out of the clouds, Eckhart's father said. Live the life you have here. Don't waste it like I did. He was wheezing now. Finding it harder and harder to breathe. He also seemed to be in a bit of pain.
Ow. Ow. Ow.
Eckhart leaned over his father's bed, tears rolling silently down his cheeks. That was the sound of a tear rolling down. I'm going to stop. This isn't the end, Father. Oh, no, this is Eckhart. This isn't the end, Father, he said, cupping his father's hand in his. It's just the beginning. Eckhart's papa needed a long moment to study his son, scrutinizing the teenager with his eyes. His breathing was getting worse still. And his pain along with it. Ow. How stupid are you? He managed to utter before he couldn't breathe any more, his lips reaching desperately for air that wasn't there. Then he was still. Rachel laughed. Those were his father's last words to him?
This may come as a shock to you, but I'd like to move on from here.
Rachel could sense sadness in Eckhart's voice, regret and pain, too. Rachel didn't even think he could feel those emotions. She also didn't really care. It's not shock. It's not a shock, Rachel said coldly. I've been thinking the exact same thing since we started. The winter was harsh. I feel like that should be bolded. Aha! It was not perfectly fixed.
The winter was harsh.
Eckhart brought her back to the field, covered in many feet of snow, as the days turned into nights and nights back into days.
I prayed for spring to never come, for it would come down to me.
Let me start over.
I prayed for...
I need...
Mortal Kombat. You have broken the rules of Mortal Kombat.
That's the best I'm going to get.
I prayed for spring to never come, for it would come down to me to plant the crops for the first time without my father. My mother's condition, she had some disorder that weakened her bones and joints, kept her from assisting me. I'd have to do the harvest all by myself, or else Mama and I would starve. For the first time in my life, my prayers were answered. Spring never came. The year is known to many at that time as the year without summer. The clouds became gray and a fog drifted across the entire planet as the snows continued into April and then May. June. I looked it up later, of course, once science had pinpointed the source. A series of 4 massive volcanic eruptions in one year filled the atmosphere with ash. 200,000 people died that year in Europe alone. Crops wouldn't grow, animals migrated south. I didn't know any of this at the time, of course. All I knew was that our food stores were running low, and we were quite clearly going to die. Mama knew as well.
Water break, do, I need a water break. Delicious. Ice cold. Alright. Where were we? Alrighty then. They were in a snow-covered wood now, Eckhart walking with his mother. She was a very skinny woman with a warm fur cloak over her shoulders and leaning on a walking stick. A bird screamed somewhere in the distance, and Eckhart's mother looked to the sky. "Do you hear that?" she said in a hushed voice.
A bird of some kind.
He's older, all right? It's been 6 months. He had throat cancer. It was a thing.
A bird of some kind, Eckhart said. You think I can shoot it?
He pulled out a pistol that must have belonged to his father. "No," his mother insisted, her voice rising. "He's a predator, like us. Let him hunt." She has the same accent as Sir, cleric owner, who apparently neither of them can keep their accent very well.
Eckhart.
Neither can Eckhart. Mama.
Mama,
Eckhart pleaded, his voice straining.
If we don't find you something to eat, you'll die.
"Perhaps that wouldn't be so bad a thing," the older woman said, deep in thought. She seemed at peace amongst the trees.
Don't say that.
Eckhart's mother looked at him with a gentle smile. "The world is a beautiful place," she told him.
The world is death, Eckhart corrected her, and father told me to protect you from it.
"Even if it costs you your life," his mother complained. "I'm tired, my boy." She frowned, unable suddenly to meet his eye any more. "I miss your father."
I suspected then that she might try something. I watched her whenever I could, but my eyes couldn't be on her 24/7. Sure enough, only a few days later, while I was working in the fields, I heard a shot go off.
Rachel was standing again in the field with Eckhart. He was bent over that evening, looking for anything edible. Still nothing had grown. As the bang went off, Eckhart straightened.
I knew it had happened right away.
He was off like a cannon, getting to the cabin in record time to find his mother sprawled on the floor, a pistol in her hand and a hole in her forehead.
"Oh my God, Mama!"
Eckhart fell to his knees at his mother's side, tears welling in his eyes. Rachel forced herself to yawn. "Can we get to you killing people?" she asked Eckhart. She wanted to remind her why she hated him so much. Conflicting emotions were making her uncomfortable. Eckhart's mother's eyes opened and screamed loudly without even stopping to breathe. But continuing on for a while. Both Eckhart and Rachel were startled, and they too began to scream. "What the hell?" Rachel said.
"Mama,"
Eckhart cried.
"¿qué hiciste? ¿Por qué te esperé?"
"Me duele, Eckhart," the mother screamed up to her son. "Pone fin es un niño. Finaliza mi. Te lo suplico. Es una bendición." "Enough!" Rachel yelled. She didn't want to see this, but she couldn't close her eyes. She didn't even have eyelids.
What else was I to do? What else could I do? She was in pain. Asked me to finish the job she had started. I had promised my dad I'd protect her, and instead I was going to be the one who killed her.
Eckhart stepped outside the cabin and grabbed his axe. "I don't want to see this," Rachel pleaded.
"I thought you said you wanted to see me kill someone."
She was quickly wishing she hadn't. And what had been with the Spanish again? How unstable was this fantasy he'd trapped her in? As Eckhart swung his axe down on his mother's neck, the scenery changed, with the sun now high in the sky and his mother's body gone and buried in the yard.
I was done with the place. Our property was nothing but a graveyard now. So I left and never returned.
"So you have your whole life open like a book ahead of you?" Rachel said, trying to speed things up. "You could go anywhere in the world your heart desired."
I went to La Brisa.
"So you went to the only other place you've ever been," she pointed out with disappointment.
For me, that was the whole world.
Eckhart didn't get to the city until that night, or maybe it was the night after that. Rachel was having a hard time keeping track of time. He traveled light, carrying only what he could fit in the pack on his back. The door he knocked on was a familiar one, and Eckhart's father's old shopkeeper buddy answered with a big smile on his face. The smile was gone the moment he recognized Eckhart. "Oi! Where's your father?" he asked, but Eckhart didn't respond.
I didn't have to. The year without summer had affected everyone.
"Come in," the nice man said, letting Eckhart into his shop.
Mr. Tracy gave me a place to live, a job. He taught me how to read and write. Homeschooled me in the evenings after a long day of work in his kitchen working as his butcher.
It still sounded like a raw deal to Rachel.
Once I knew how to read, I quickly became accustomed with the library in town. I couldn't believe a place existed with so many words under one roof. I spent more and more time there, getting whisked away by the worlds and circumstances within the written page.
"Didn't you ever talk to anyone?" Rachel asked.
I wasn't quite sure how. I kept to myself because I was afraid even to introduce myself. I'd go home late at night, and Mr. Tracy would tell me stories about his life, about his younger years traveling. He taught me all about the world and the curve of the horizon.
"What?"
For 30 years I lived with him, worked with him.
30 years? Rachel repeated with surprise. "You stayed with him for 30 years?
He didn't have any children of his own, and the longer I stayed, the older he got, and the more he began to rely on me as I relied on him. He was much more to me than just a shopkeeper."
"So what happened in 30 years?" Rachel asked.
He died.
She supposed she should have seen that coming.
He passed in his sleep one night as I was closing up below. I didn't find him until the next morning.
"So then you left?" Rachel asked. She was kind of hoping he'd get to the vampire stuff already, because she was starting to empathize with him, and she really didn't want to start doing that.
Actually, I stayed and ran the store. Someone had to. And it was working there that it happened.
"You got turned into a vampire?"
I fell in love.
Lightning flashed in the sky above Rachel, standing in the La Brescia street outside Eckhart's shop. She could see him, much older now, and looking much more as she remembered him, turning the sign in his window from "Abierto" to "Cerrado." Just as he did, a woman with short curly brown hair and an elegant flowing dress banged impatiently against the glass of the store. "Stop listening, dumb Xbox." She looked 19 or 20, and clung tightly to the velvet shawl around her shoulders. Her dress was mesmerizing, with layers of red and orange giving her the impression of being on fire. For a moment Eckhart was stunned, rendered completely dumbstruck.
"We're closed,"
he said, dropping the sign as he failed to pin it correctly. He didn't seem to even notice his eyes were locked on her, as if she was the first beautiful woman he'd ever seen.
She was. I'd seen women, of course. Working in a shop meant that I had to deal with a good number of them, but they'd only ever looked at me as a shopkeeper coming in with their husbands to peruse my wares or whatnot. This one was different.
"Mercy, sir," the woman said through the glass. "Please. There's all manner of unkind men out tonight." She did seem in quite a hurry to get off the streets, throwing hurried glances over her shoulder.
"You've seen these men about?"
he asked, looking around her. "I've seen one," she told Eckhart. "He was my date tonight, but a complete bore. An immature boy who didn't take to rejection well."
"Are you all right?"
Eckhart asked. He unlocked the door and opened it, quickly allowing her inside before closing it again. The lock clicked back into place, and he turned to her. She took off her shawl and laid it on the nearby counter. I think so, she told Eckhart. "When I wouldn't go in with him, he grabbed me. I thought he was going to take my virtue, so I kicked him in his unspeakables and ran."
"Sounds warranted,"
Eckhart commented.
This was the first time I'd ever had a normal conversation with a woman. I was immediately smitten.
Water break, do 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 do. Water break, do 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 do. Water break. Ooh, that went all the way down. You know what we need to do? She said breathlessly, pacing around his shop. You need to collect all your friends together. We should go back there and send them a message.
I don't have any friends,
Eckhart admitted quietly. She turned on him in surprise, and his gaze lowered to the floor. That's impossible, she said with a little laugh. Everyone has friends. Eckhart shrugged.
I'm sorry to shatter your world view.
Well, you should really... Water break. Well, you should really acquire some, she scolded him airily. They are incredibly useful.
For sending messages?
He asked. I wouldn't know, she said. It is expressly frowned upon for a woman to be sending a man any kind of message that isn't come over here and drop your pants. Eckhart shrugged again.
I've never been on the receiving end of one of those kind of messages before.
The woman laughed. That's not true, she said. I've been sending you exactly those kind of messages since stepping into your shop. She sat up on the counter and crossed her legs. So what do you do for fun around here? Eckhart laughed.
I read books,
he admitted.
What's your name?
The woman frowned. What is this, 20 questions?
I didn't know what 20 questions was, but... Yes,
he said, approaching her slowly. What's your name? She asked him, ignoring that he'd posed the question first.
That's not how this game works,
Eckhart told her, smiling, flirting. He then quickly added with uncertainty, Is it? Rachel wanted to puke. Felicia Annalise, she said quietly, adhering to the rules.
Eckhart Ghens.
That's a handsome name, Felicia said, coyly, playing with a pen. I've never known an Eckhart before.
My parents gave it to me,
Eckhart told her, stating the obvious. I haven't heard of the Gaines family, she said, biting down on the pen. She seemed to be scrutinizing him. Are you of Spanish descent? Eckhart nodded.
My father was a farmer.
How does a farmer become the rich shopkeeper of his own store? She asked, her interest piqued. Rachel's had waned. Can we get to the part where you kill her? She asked impatiently.
Is that what you think is going to happen?
Am I wrong? Rachel asked, pretty sure she knew the answer.
I suppose not. But first we fall in love. I was a total gentleman, and after 6 months I knew I didn't want to spend my life with anyone else. I asked her to marry me.
Rachel hoped the woman would say no.
She said yes.
Of course she did. Suddenly Rachel wasn't in Eckhart's shop anymore. She was in a green field. First it was empty, but then there was benches, appearing from thin air in rows, and there was a red carpet and a stage, even a proscenium. It was like Eckhart was building the memory of his wedding from his mind. The people popped into place last, first the guests, then the crew, the minister. Eckhart was the second last person to appear in a brilliant black tuxedo that made him look half-decent, though still twice Felicia's age. Felicia materialized last in a stunning sleeveless white dress. It draped lightly on her shoulders and tied in a ribbon around her waist. Her arms were laden with golden arm cuffs, snaking down her biceps, and I was drinking water. Water break, do-do-do-do-do, that was delicious.
We chose to have the wedding in a field just off the main road. Well, in view. I might add, as there had been rumors of the Queen and her entourage passing on a journey towards the other side of the country.
Me comprometo a proteger y apoyar a usted, Eckhart said, speaking his gibberish language to his bride, very soon to be. Voy a cuidar de usted cada segundo de cada minuto de cada dia de cada mes de cada ano. My Spanish is just chef kiss. What did you say? Rachel asked, not that she was interested. Well, maybe a little.
It's not important.
Was he blushing? Felicia giggled. Eso suna agadetto. I was trying to do British accent Spanish, which is just not going to work. Eso suena agadetto, she said, leaning forward and kissing him. I mean, the Spanish in general is not working at all, but anyway. The minister pulled her away, scolding her angrily. No estemos alle todavía, he yelled. Eckhart pushed the minister aside. Que hago! Si excepto, Felicia said, moving in and kissing him again. Everyone in the field stood and applauded. Rachel was confused. What the hell just happened?
I made the woman my wife. It would have been ideal for the queen to have passed the wedding at that very moment when I was at my happiest. Unfortunately, the queen's wasn't the first party to come across our wedding. At the time, there were two factions fighting over ruling rights of Spain. The Carlists didn't think Isabella II deserved to be queen, and they didn't treat her supporters with much dignity.
Praise the Queen Isabella! The minister yelled, stepping in front of the happy couple. The true ruler of Spain! There was a loud bang, like a gunshot, and suddenly there was a penny-sized hole in the minister's forehead. The bang had really been a gunshot. A much mustachioed man walked down the aisle, a pistol still smoking in his left hand.
I know what's going on here.
No, that sounded too much like Eckhart. I need an accent for this guy. I mean, I could do something wacky. Do you want me to do something wacky?
I know what's going on here, he said with excitement. The queen's passing by this way, and you wanted to give her a warm welcome.
The man twisted his mustache between the fingers of his free hand and thought.
I suppose this wasn't the message you were hoping to send.
He pulled another pistol from his belt and shot a woman in the crowd.
But might I suggest another?
I was going with Arnold Schwarzenegger, but I think I'm going to kind of change that a little, make it a little more just dude with strange accent. There were men behind him, armed and dressed in brilliant blue uniforms. Many carried muskets, while others held more brutal melee weapons, like a twisted spear and rusted swords. Those men dispersed through the panicked crowd as the leader just laughed.
Kill them all, he yelled, and make it bloody.
The Carlists opened fire on the crowd indiscriminately. Even the women and children were mowed down, and it seemed that was something Eckhart wasn't going to stand for.
I knew in my heart I had to do something.
Eckhart came at the leader as he was still reloading.
Unfortunately, I chose the wrong thing.
The leader didn't have time to finish reloading, but with a whip of his hand there was a bayonet on his pistol. Eckhart's first punch came down on the man, and he only barely dodged it. Eckhart swiped the man's hat square off, but that was all the time he needed. The Carlist stabbed his bayonet straight in Eckhart's stomach.
His blade nicked my spine. I was paralyzed before I even hit the ground, unable to move but awake to see everything that came after.
You bastardo! Felicia yelled, spitting at the man. Her eyes were red, but her tears seemed more of fury than anything else. Do you really think the Queen will let you get away with this? The leader of the Carlists finished reloading his gun and jumped onto the altar beside her.
Ha ha!
His mustache curling with a sneer.
Ha ha!
The blue-coated rebel leader leveled his gun on the tragic bride's head. Apparently he turned French, too.
Adieu,
he said, pulling the trigger. Once they were certain every single person was dead. Oh, sorry.
Once they were certain every single person was dead, they left. I was still alive, staring up at the slow sunrise and just waiting to bleed out so that I could be with my wife in heaven. Things didn't work out that way. Day turned to night, and then they came. By that point, I had been drifting in and out of consciousness. I might have slipped away for good when I heard voices, and the voices quickly brought me back to reality.
"Callists," one voice said. "It has to be. Leave you a message, no doubt." "This is no message," Owen's voice said in reply. "This is a declaration of war. Get the gears moving, Alfred."
"Yes, your majesty," the first voice said. I don't know where the strength came from, but I started to scream and yell and cry.
The first time he opened his mouth, the noise that came out was completely indiscernible. The second one wasn't much better. Coming across as a guttural moan. The third almost sounded like help.
Help! Ayuda! He said loudly. Por favor!
Su Majestat, Alfred said loudly. No hay un sobreviviente. Sobreviviente. No hay un sobreviviente. Yeah, okay. Eckhart was sprawled out on the grass, where Alfred found him, followed quickly by a young woman. Her dress was white as the moon, and her skin was paler still.
She was the Queen Isabella II of Spain.
What happened here? Alfred asked Eckhart. I lost his accent, but I will.
Hem.
Isabella hit him hard in the shoulder.
Don't ask the man questions you already know the answer to. It's redundant.
She offered Eckhart a hand.
Can you stand, sir?
No,
Eckhart said, swallowing hard.
That's unfortunate,
Alfred said, his gaze falling solemnly on Eckhart's wound. The Queen didn't seem quite as disturbed.
It is indeed,
she said with less enthusiasm. She leaned close to whisper into Eckhart's ear.
Hem. Would you like the opportunity to get revenge for your beautiful wife?
Eckhart tried to shake his head, but merely flopped to one side. Alfred tried to pull Isabella back, but she just pushed him away.
Your Majesty, he said, surely we should practice some discretion after tonight's events.
Where was the discretion, Alfred?
Isabella asked, a question Rachel thought was quite sensible. What Isabella did next was the most unsensible thing Rachel could think of. Her fangs extended. Queen Isabella, the whatever of Spain, was a vampire. She took a knife from Alfred's belt and sliced her wrist, pressing the bleeding gash against Eckhart's mouth.
Drink, she said. Drink and get revenge, not just for everyone you have ever loved, but for Queen and country as well.
I didn't want it.
You didn't want eternal life? Rachel asked.
I didn't want to be damned.
How did he think the rest of them felt? All the girls he'd turned? Had he ever thought of them or their wants at all?
Misery yearns for company.
It wasn't a decent enough excuse, not even in the same postal code.
She didn't ask for my permission. She left as I fell into a coma, left me with only one instruction.
Revenge, Rachel said, filling in his blank.
I awoke in the clearing many hours later, completely alone. Everything was both dead and silent and deafeningly loud at the same time. The Queen's caravan must have wiped the field clean before leaving, because there was no sign of any slaughter ever taking place. In hindsight, the Queen had given me a blessing. Though I never got to bury my love, were she still there, I'd likely have fed on her before being able to control myself.
Rachel remembered when she first woke up as a vampire, and how disorienting it was for her. She knew it was likely for the best Eckhart awoke alone. It was quite dark now, darker than anywhere Rachel had ever seen.
With all our modern lighting, people have forgotten what real darkness feels like.
Rachel thought she understood.
True darkness felt like nothing, like the world around just disappeared. Then Eckhart showed her what he saw as a vampire, and it was like she could see again. Every bit of grass, every swaying branch. She could see it all, glowing in a beautiful grayscale that made the artist in her want to just sit down and sketch. Eckhart got up slowly, careful to test his newly working legs again before completely trusting them.
I felt stronger than I'd ever felt in my life, better in almost every way, but I also felt hungry.
Eckhart looked around him with eyes sharp as knives. It was the look of a predator, a look Rachel knew only too well.
I could hear the beating hearts of the animals around me. Rabbits and shrews, mice and ants. I could hear it all, but my attention was on something a little bigger. A deer.
Eckhart disappeared in a flash, and Rachel had to move fast as she could to keep up.
I moved like a speeding train and struck the deer with just as much force as one. It was dead in an instant, and my instincts took over. I fed deeply from it, draining the creature until there was nothing left to drink from its veins.
So then what did you do? Rachel asked. Did you go after the Carlists?
No, I did what any sane person would do. I ran.
Sure enough, he took off, getting onto the road adjacent to the one the Queen had been traveling on only hours ago. He started off at a sprint, with Rachel following behind, floating just meters from him. At first he was going at an acceptable human pace, but the pace quickened until the landscape flashed by at the speed of light. Rachel didn't know if he was really moving that fast or just hitting the fast forward on his memory, but she supposed it didn't matter.
When the first four rays of sunlight pierced through the morning veil, it was like burning hot white daggers slicing through my skin. I didn't know what was going on. I'd never even heard of a vampire before. I just knew I had to get out of the light. I found a large tree and buried myself underneath, creating a large bed for myself in the dirt. Once the sun was down again, I knew almost instinctively. Rising as if from my grave, I kept moving, following the path again on my way to France.
France? Rachel asked in surprise. She supposed 40 to 50 years. It was about time for a change of scenery.
Spain had taken everything from me, even my life.
And the Carlists? Rachel asked.
I've never considered revenge to be a very worthy pursuit. Not like love, anyway. Nothing I did was going to resurrect my beloved. I crossed the border into France and never looked back.
Excuse me. My apologies. My lord. Water break. Do 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 do. I am so out of water there. Fun. And there is a lot left. And a lot of time. How long have we been spending? 53 minutes. Fun. Alright, sorry. Where were we going here?
I've never considered revenge to be a very worthy pursuit, not like love anyway. Nothing I did was going to resurrect my beloved. I crossed the border into France and never looked back.
All without feeding on a human? Rachel asked in surprise. So far Eckhart was seeming much more like the victim than the villain, but she didn't know how much of Eckhart's story was bullshit or at least extremely embellished.
I didn't come across any humans for the first 2 nights of my journey. It wasn't until the 3rd night, on a small road in the south of France, that I stumbled upon what I thought was a small band of merchants heading to Paris.
Rachel watched as Eckhart approached 3 armed men surrounding a damaged wooden cart. It seemed the cart had gotten stuck in the mud road, and the men were trying to dig it out. As Eckhart got close to the men, their attention turned from the cart, and they moved to meet him coming up the road.
I could hear their hearts beat. It was perhaps the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. The 3 on the road and 2 more in the trees. I didn't pay the other heartbeats any mind. My attention as rooted on the 3 men as their attention was on me.
Ah, bonjour, mon ami. one said, waving his arm. We could use your assistance with something. There was something about his smile Rachel didn't trust. He didn't seem much upset about the predicament he was in. None of them were. Eckhart didn't seem nearly as suspicious, however. Perhaps he was too distracted by his own hunger. It was only after a long moment that Eckhart managed to ask,
"How can I help?"
You can give me all your money and any remaining supplies you might be carrying, the leader responded. As he spoke, the two men in the trees landed heavily on the ground and moved to block Eckhart's escape. Eckhart didn't seem amused.
"Leave me alone,"
he muttered quietly, staring darkly out from under his messy black hair. There's a price to being alone, another man said. Eckhart turned his gaze on him. It's all your money and supplies, the leader said, speaking his demand.
I could hear more footsteps. There was someone else in the woods, getting closer with every step. Like 5 men weren't enough, there was something... Oh, like 5 men weren't enough. There was something different about this one. It was a woman. I could hear her quiet breathing. She was trying not to be heard, a move that gave me pause. The men had already played their hand. Why keep the 6th person a secret?
Why don't you just kill them? Rachel asked, confused why Eckhart was allowing them to push him around.
I didn't yet know my own strength. Had I any clue at all, I'd have ripped all their heads from their bodies.
Not very creative, Rachel chided quieting then so the story could continue.
I also didn't know what they were saying. I'm translating their French now, but back then mine was a bit rusty.
Take his clothes, one of the men suggested. And you'll do what? The man on the leader's other side asked. Give him a blowy? I could use a new suit, the first lackey said quietly. Eckhart was still wearing his wedding tuxedo. Meant nothing funny by it. Some of the looks from the other men suggested they didn't believe him. Eckhart was still fairly oblivious, except that he seemed to know he was in a lot of danger. There was a rustling in the brush, and a woman stepped out, dressed in her nightgown and a blue soldier's jacket slung over her shoulders. Upon her head was a familiar 3-pointed hat. Genevieve LaBelle, Rachel said, recognizing her mentor immediately. Bonjour. Oh, that did not sound at all. Bonjour, the woman said, turning immediately to the leader. Qu'est-ce que c'est? She said in French. Une sorte de partie B. Your translation sucks again, Rachel told Eckhart, though it didn't seem like he was listening. All the men around Genevieve seemed shocked at her boldness. She continued talking. Pas sur ma propriété. Pas sur ma propriété. Madame, the leader of the brigand said, unholstering his pistol and pointing it at her head, il est imprudent de porter une épée à une fusillade. It all might as well have been gibberish. With a flash, Genevieve's sword was drawn and tasting blood. Genevieve cut the leader's hand clear off, taking the gun with it. The bandit leader fell back, clutching his now bleeding stump. Oh, obtenez cette salope! Genevieve looked to the others with what must have been a warning. Finirez-moi, she said with an edge to her voice, et vous allez tout mourir. Rachel really wished she knew what her old mentor was saying, though she had to admit the woman was really hot when she spoke French. Whatever she'd said, the bandits didn't pay any mind. The two closest to her came in with fists swinging. She slashed one across the chest, and then... I spelled that as the wrong lead. And then the other diagonally from hip to shoulder. Recovering from her flurry of motion, Genevieve threw her sword past Rachel at a man behind Eckhart who was only just pulling his pistol. The man stumbled back, and Genevieve crossed the distance between them in moments, taking her sword back and decapitating the man as he came at her. Wow, Rachel said out loud despite herself. That was amazing. Especially for a human. Rachel kind of wanted to see it again. Was there a rewind feature?
It would have impressed me as well, were I paying any attention, but all I could see was blood. Smell blood. Blood was my only sense.
It occurred to Rachel that Eckhart hadn't said anything for a while. Had he gone somewhere? Was that why the translations had stopped?
The bandit leader was the closest, and I was on him in an instant.
Eckhart bit deeply into the bandit leader's neck, and the man gave out a blood-curdling scream like Rachel had never known. That wasn't very blood-curdling, though.
This right here was the single most greatest moment of my life.
Gross, Rachel said.
Animal blood was nothing like live human blood. The fear makes it sweeter. The flavor was so enveloping, and I was so hungry.
Genevieve turned at the scream, and her face was horrified at the sight awaiting her. Rachel expected her to run, but Genevieve was just too damn brave.
She spoke first in French.
Compose yourself, sir.
Compose yourself, sir.
No, that didn't sound good either. Compose yourself, sir, she said sharply, leveling her sword at him.
I had no idea what she'd said, but still I dropped the man and stood. He was out of blood anyway.
Eckhart wiped the blood from his face and looked down on it upon his hands.
My God.
Spanish? Genevieve asked. I can do Spanish.
Her Spanish was atrocious, but at least she didn't flee into the woods.
What are you? Genevieve asked. Eckhart didn't respond right away, just shook in his boots, saying finally, I don't know. Something in his expression must have put her at ease, because she reached out to him. He shied away from her hand. Don't do it, Rachel said, recognizing the look on Genevieve's face. Don't pity him. Run. Run for your life. Stay, Genevieve said. I own the land here, and I have the room. You can stay for a night.
I do all my traveling at night,
Eckhart admitted.
It's shelter from the sun that I need.
Then stay the day, Genevieve offered. Why was she so desperate to help this monster of a man? Eckhart grabbed her hand at last, but only to single out the diamond ring on her finger.
Will your husband approve?
Eckhart asked. Genevieve shook her head. He'll turn in his grave. I've lost her accent so bad. He'll turn in his grave. Nope, that sounds like a dude. He'll turn in his grave, she said, looking up at the stars for a moment and fingering her ring. She then looked back to him, her eyes more distant than ever. Would you like to be spotted on a main road surrounded by 5 men's bodies with their blood dripping from your lips, or would you rather come with me?
She made a good case.
Should I call it there? We are at 1 hour and 3 minutes, and we still have quite a bit to go. It's like maybe half over. Alright, I wanted this to be the last episode, but it does seem like there is going to be a 0.5. I'm going to call it there because I'm also quite hungry and I've only got an hour before I have to go to work. So I am going to call it there, make some food, chill out, and try to finish this as soon as I can because I'm trying to get it done so we can get to Season 1 of 99% Geek and all the other books that are on offer there. So you can look forward to all of that. It's coming soon enough. In the meantime, this February, I will be releasing a special Valentine's edition of the Eldon Chronicles on my website. On my blog, really. It'll be on my Patreon and then on my blog a little bit later. So if you want to check that out, that's 99geek.ca. Other than that, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Hopefully I remember where I was. And that'll be that. Alright, let's hit the end.